to speak, or I'll speak, and then if there's anybody else, I think we can then call a question on the amendment, and then the question as amended, assuming it carries. First of all, I just want to, make it clear that there was never any intention, and I think it's just important to say this, and I think we've ended up with a good result, as we often do. It's like sausage making around here. This amendment actually helps to sort of put a number of different questions on the table, but if you look at what the recommendation is that we're being asked to look at, even in its initial form before we amend it, for an initial assessment of the task force's recommendation, underlying assumptions and principles, with direction to report to the executive committee, and then it goes on how best to move forward. So and then if you go down further into my letter of transmittal, there are many questions and details to be considered, much work to be done, and I just said I'm determined to see specific proposals for action consistent with this report presented for consideration as quickly as possible. These problems have been decades in the making, and people are waiting for us to act. So, I mean, all we were doing today was sending it off to the city manager with precisely the request of, please look at all these complicated questions that arose out of this report and see what's possible for us to do and how we might do it and when we might do it and so forth and so on. Secondly, it is all about the tenants, and I guess I would only add to that, it's about increasing supply as well, because I think that's about the tenants too. In the end, I mean, it's about the tenants and people wanting to be our tenants, and so I think it is all about that. And finally, I agree with everybody who said it's all about the money. I'll come back to that in a moment. I can't resist spending 1 second just touching on this business of politicians on boards. I just happen to have a particular view, and it comes from the same kind of view I would advance in business life, which is that it is very difficult to wear multiple hats for any human being. And inevitably, what people have told me in these public sector corporations is when you put a large number of elected politicians onto boards, they are confronted each time they go there, with the same difficulty that people are who have these kinds of multiple hats in business life, which is that you are never entirely sure which hat you're wearing in terms of what you're saying or doing. And the trouble is you're always wearing the hat of an elected official. You can't take it off. And so I just think that we will be better off to redeploy those people at another place, right directly working with tenants locally, and have the board consist of people who are citizens, including citizens with lived experience, meaning tenants or past tenants of Toronto community housing. I think you'll get better governance, but that's just a personal view. On the money, I completely agree, obviously, that there's not very much we can get done without new funds. And I guess that's evidenced by the fact that there's probably no one, I would say safely, that has spent more time trying to get more money from the other governments in particular than me since I was elected. And because I recognize the fact it can't come, as I'll return to in a moment, from our property taxpayers, but we do need it. Secondly, I think a part of what was a bit lost today in some of the discussion about the different models is the report actually sets out some viable, thoughtful options. It doesn't mean they're right or that we'll be able to, in the end, after the city manager does his work, that we'll be able to implement them or exactly as written, but they're options that are specifically set out to produce more money for the tenants and for increasing the supply and so on, in addition to our advocacy to the other governments. So it wasn't just assumed that all the money would come from them, because I don't think that would be a safe assumption. Even with my optimistic hat on that, when I was questioning Sean earlier today, I mean, I think there is going to be money certainly coming from the federal government. I think it would be astonishing at this stage, after all that's been said privately and publicly, that there wouldn't be. But you can't count on it being enough, or the other government coming to the table, I don't know. But the report specifically sets out some of the things it does, even in terms of structuring, with a view to getting some more money. And secondly, I will say this, and I think it's really important for us to focus on this as we go forward with this and after we receive the city manager's deliberations. The biggest mistake we could make, no matter where we get the money from, whether it's from other governments or from ways we get it, the biggest mistake we could make is to put that money into a model that is broken and has been broken for a long time, because all we're then going to be doing is putting in a lot more money wherever it came from, because it all ultimately comes from the same place, and we're going to be disappointing the tenants and disappointing ourselves because we're just pouring it into a model that isn't working. I do want to say that and I'm sorry he's not here, but he came up and said he had to go off to a planning meeting, but I'll just say it, and I'm sure it'll get passed on to Councillor Perks, that I'm not surprised, and I don't say this in any sort of critical way, that he would say, well, sure, it's not a problem. We can simply increase property taxes 2.5% and pay for this. And that's fine. That's his view, and that's a view we've heard from him before, because he also suggested increasing property taxes 2.5% to pay some of our operating issues. And I would just say simply, I don't accept, I can't accept, I won't accept the notion that we can just afford to say, let's tack 5% onto property taxes, because everybody out there will say, notwithstanding, I think they all share in our moral obligation that that's the best way to do this. I think there are other ways we have to go to do this, including help from the other governments, but also including some creative ways that this report suggests to us. The